Hello, I'm Stan Grant. Welcome to the Bridge of No Return. There is a bridge between North and South Korea that symbolises a divided nation. It is called the Bridge of No Return. The Korean Peninsula is one of the world's flashpoints, a war that has never ended and is now a nuclear threat. For nearly 70 years, the peninsula has been divided by the demilitarised zone. A fragile armistice has been in place, but no peace treaty. The ruthless Kim regime is now in its third generation, and millions of people remain locked away in what has been called a hermit kingdom. Well, the South Korean capital, Seoul, is a bustling metropolis of nearly 10 million people, and ABC reporter Carrington Clark is at the National War Memorial. He joins us from there. Carrington, give us a sense of just how the Korean War still plays out in the lives and the minds of Korean people.
Well, there are some obvious signs that this war has never ended between North and South Korea. For example, subway stations still have signage pointing out the fact that they are shelters in the case that there was an attack from the north. This giant war memorial where I'm talking to you from is right in the middle of Seoul, and they do put a great deal of focus on trying to remember the war. Here in South Korea, people, young men, are still forced to serve in the military during their 20s. And so there is still a great deal of focus on the fact that there is a live threat just north of their border. But South Korea is also a officially developed nation now, according to the UN. It's a country that's economy is the 10th biggest in the world. It's a country that has in many ways proven itself since the war as being a very capable nation, and as you'd expect, a lot of people here are very much focused on that success. North Korea puts great importance on Armistice Day as being a symbol of a country facing off the danger of an outside empire in the case of America. In here, it's a much more sombre occasion. South Koreans want a resolution to this conflict, but there does seem to be a pervading sense among the population that although politicians still talk about reunification as being the ultimate goal, that many people here don't seem to actually think that will be plausible, especially as the years go by.
Carrington, thank you for that. Well, to understand the current relationship between the two Koreas, we have to go back to how we got to this point. The Korean Peninsula has been fought over and occupied for centuries. It is today a divided land, a relic of the Cold War. Separated at the 38th parallel at the end of World War II, the US backed the South, or Republic of Korea. In the north, the Democratic People's Republic, the Soviets installed Kim Il-sung, the first of a family dynasty that still rules today. On June 25, 1950, Kim invaded the South.
South Korean villages awoke to a world suddenly filled with noise and flame. The communists, made bold by months of small-scale raiding across the 38th parallel, had finally launched their undeclared, all-out war of conquest.
It triggered a bloody conflict that drew in US-led United Nations forces, including Australians. In the first year of fighting, the southern capital of Seoul fell several times. American soldiers beat back the north, but China intervened, hundreds of thousands of troops propping up Kim's forces, forcing a US retreat and forging an unbreakable bond between China and the DPRK.
The UN was facing a new enemy in Korea, and a new war had begun. The Chinese rolled swiftly southward, splitting the Allied line and cutting off Marine and 7th Division troops in the east.
The Korean War raged on for 3 years. 5 million people were killed, half of them civilians. An armistice was eventually signed on July 27, 1953, but there has been no peace treaty.
I believe that we must try to limit the war to Korea for these vital reasons: to make sure that the precious lives of our fighting men are not wasted, to see that the security of our country and the free world is not needlessly jeopardized, and to prevent a third world war.
The death of Kim Il-sung in 1994 passed leadership to his son Kim Jong-il. Hopeful signs soon evaporated. Korea endured crippling famine, remained cut off from the world, but poured its money into its military, including a nuclear weapons program. Sanctions haven't worked. Multinational talks have failed. North Korea has an arsenal of perhaps as many as 60 nuclear weapons. It has long-range missiles that could reach the US or Australia, and it regularly threatens to use them. A third generation of the Kim dynasty, the youthful Kim Jongun, now presides over a rogue nuclear power. Donald Trump tried insult and threat.
Little rocket man, he may be smart, he may be strategic, and he may be totally crazy. But you know what? No matter what he is, we're going to handle it, folks, believe me.
Then, one-on-one talks. Despite much theatre and fanfare, the US president even stepping over the border into the north, it came to little. Trump is gone. Another American president, Joe Biden, now faces an old enemy in a war without end. So think of what it is like to live in a place where a wrong word can be a death sentence, where you are forced to watch public executions, where at times you need to eat grass to survive. These are some of the harrowing stories of North Korean defectors like Park Yong-mi. She escaped into China and lived to tell the tale. Some have questioned her story, but it is a chilling window into a secret world. Yong-mi, thank you so much for giving us your time. You were born into a relatively privileged family in North Korea. Describe what life was like for you.
Yeah, so I was born into the middle class. My father was a party member. But when you say a middle class or privileged life in North Korea means you are just not dying from starvation. That is the, I think, standard of being privileged. I remember when I was born in 1993 at the end of the year, that's when a few years before the Soviet Union collapsed. So they were stuck helping North Korean regime, and the regime decided to not feeding the people. So, literally every day was survivor. People dying on the streets daily from starvation, and people were disappearing and public execution. But despite that, I still did not know I was, oppressed. I did not even know that I was living in a hermit kingdom. I literally believed, I was brainwashed to believe that I was living in a paradise, socialist paradise, and I had nothing to envy in this world.
That phrase you've used there, nothing to envy, it's repeated a lot in North Korea, isn't it?
Yeah. So as you said, that nothing envy is the title of the song, where North Korean children have to sing every single day, called Nothing to Envy, because we have the greatest leader in the world. How do they do that? It's easy. They block the country. They isolate the country. So North Korean people in this 21st century, they do not even know the existence of internet. We don't have any outside information. People are not free to travel even within a country. So we don't know. I actually never even seen the map of the world. I never knew Africa or like Canada, Australia even. I only knew few countries in the world. So the regime keeping us ignorant on purpose. So we don't know how the prosperous the outside the world is.
You talk about being forced to watch executions and how you lived with so much suspicion in the country. To what extent is there a government surveillance of the people?
It was the disappearance of our neighbors was like daily thing. The first thing my mom taught me as a young girl growing up in North Korea was, don't even whisper, because the birds and mice could hear me. She told me that the most dangerous weapon that I had in my body was my tongue. If I say one single wrong thing, it wasn't just gonna kill me, my life. It was going to kill the 3 generations of our family's life. The North Korean regime does that. When one person does something wrong, they kill 3 to 8 generations of that family altogether. So I was learned eventually not to even think.
How did you make that decision to escape?
So it wasn't even like coming to my decision point. I remember right before, when I was 13 years old, I was literally starving. I couldn't find anything to eat. Thankfully, I was living on the border town of North Korea. So I was able to see the electricity lights coming from China at night. If you see the satellite photo right now, North Korea is literally the darkest place on earth. So I was thinking if maybe I go where the lights were, I might be fine, like I might able to find something to eat. That's why I crossed that frozen river into China to find food.
Now, once you got out, things didn't necessarily change, did they? In fact, they took an even worse turn.
Yeah, so in 2007, I crossed that frozen river into China. And as soon as we got there, the first thing I was seeing my mom being raped. And these Chinese human traffickers told us that if, in order for us to be surviving in China, we had to be sold. And it's because Chinese Communist Party had a one-child policy. And due to this policy, a lot of girls got aborted. So right now, there are more than 30 million young men in China cannot find wives. So they demand these sexual slaves from North Korea and selling us like pigs. And that's how I was sold for less than $300. And my mother was sold for less than $100 in this 21st century.
How did you get out?
After 2 years being a slave, I learned that if I go to South Korea, someone told me that I could be free. And the missionaries helped me to escape, which means walking across the frozen Gobi Desert into Mongolia in 2009, minus 40 degrees. We walked across Gobi Desert, and in Mongolia, they helped us to go to South Korea, and that's how I became free eventually.
Look, it is a remarkable story that you tell, but I have to ask you this. Some people have criticised you, you've been called a celebrity defector, and that you have made up or exaggerated these stories. What do you say to those critics?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you're asking that question. So first of all, we can answer this question many ways. If you right now go on the satellites on Google, you can see North Korean concentration camps. And not only the concentration camps, North Korean entire border is sealed. North Korean regime cannot even afford the electricity, but they are putting the electrified fences on the normal border. Not only that, they are burying the landmines. And then putting a machine gun. So no citizen can escape from North Korea. There are right now 33,000 North Korean defectors in South Korea. 33,000 defectors cannot collectively lie about something they have seen. The United Nations in 2014 reported what is happening in North Korea is a modern-day Holocaust. And people doubted Holocaust when it was happening. People say that's not true. How can that be possible? And we are essentially repeating history. If there's North Korea as a paradise and none of this happening, as a journalist, can you go to North Korea and see the normal towns? You cannot. Why is that? Why is the North Korean regime so afraid that they are executing their own citizens from escaping, and nobody can go inside the country? And as a journalist, you cannot never see the truth of North Korean people's lives.
But there have been questions about the detail of your story, about executions, about specific dates, about people being executed for things like watching a foreign film. Is that true? Or have you misremembered or have a hazy memory?
That is really good question. I'm glad you asked that question. So recently, Kim Jongun declared that wearing a jean and watching South Korean movies gonna send you to life sentence. And also, distributing that is gonna public execution. That was like 2 months of the news that came out. And they made official newspaper law. This is a law that we are going after. So you don't have to listen to me as a journalist. You can just listen to what the North Korean official, they are publishing on their newspaper what is illegal. Literally, giving a movie, Hollywood movie, to your friend, which is distribution, is public execution.
This may seem like a strange question to ask, but are there things that you miss about North Korea?
Of course I miss it. It's not I hated my people. I miss my people. I hate I hate the regime. I hate the system. But the thing is, I miss the land. I miss friends that I grew up with. I miss my teachers. I miss my neighbors. The fact that I spoke out as a dislike country, 3 generations of my family got punished. I do not know if they got executed or sent to political prison camp. But I still have so many loved ones. after my father passed away, his last wish was, I want to be buried even when I'm dead to my homeland. And that's, I think, every North Korean's dreaming of. We all want to be buried. Even when we are dead, we want to go home. And that is why I'm fighting, despite the risk of risking my own life, but I also risked all my family's lives for doing what I do.
Park Young-mi, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Justice Michael Kirby was the chairman of the UN's Commission of Inquiry on DPRK, and in his words, he was shocked by the number, variety and awfulness of the human rights abuses of the regime, comparing the conduct to that of the Nazis.
For 30 years, I had been a judge in Australia, and I had therefore heard some pretty horrible things over the years, but nothing really had prepared me for the kinds of awful conduct that was revealed by the witnesses. A crime against humanity is a crime that shocks the conscience of humanity. And that was certainly the case in many of the testimonies that we received. And although there, of course, were many differences between North Korea and Nazi Germany, there were similarities, and those similarities emerge from a reading of the report of the Commission of Inquiry. Here it is. This is the report of the Commission of Inquiry, and those who have gone through the process of investigation are then dedicated to ensuring that the world does not just put this on a library shelf, but acts on it, and that the United Nations responds to it, because otherwise the lessons of history will not be learned and accountability will not occur.
Now for an insight into the rogue leader of North Korea, let's bring in author Anna Fairfield. Her book, The Great Successor, The Secret Rise and Rule of Kim Jongun. Anna, nice of you to join us. You've spoken to a lot of people who've been close to him, who know him. What do they tell you about his worldview?
They really painted a portrait of a man who had an extremely dysfunctional childhood and had really been groomed his entire life for the job that he's got there now. And so he sees himself as the most important person in North Korea. And everything he does, when he wakes up every morning, he thinks about staying in power, keeping his family in power there in North Korea. And so everything that he does is with that in mind. So the summits that he had with Donald Trump, with Moon Jae-in of South Korea, Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin, that was all about making Kim Jong-un look like an international statesman, look like somebody who could stand shoulder to shoulder with other responsible nuclear-armed leaders of the world. That's how he wanted to come across. So everything that he does is designed to make him look to the outside world and to the people of North Korea like he's a legitimate leader.
Anna, he was so young when he took over, wasn't he? And I remember being there that day when he first spoke to the Korean people. Many of them knew very little about him. And he has styled himself, hasn't he, very much on his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. How important is it, that connection through the generations and the story that he tells the people, the cult of personality?
Yeah, it's extremely important, Stan, that this is a family that claims the right to rule because they say they've been descended from this sacred mountain on the border between China and North Korea called Mount Paektu. And the constitution of North Korea has been changed to say that the leadership will be handed down from generation to generation. So this is really the world's only communist dynasty. And so for Kim Jong-un, he has really tried to remind everybody of his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, who did preside over North Korea during the better times, during the foundation, but also the times when the Soviet Union and communist China backed up North Korea and the economy was doing relatively well. So even to this day, Kim Il-sung is quite revered and beloved inside North Korea. So Kim Jong-un has done a lot to remind everybody of his ancestry there. So the weight gain, the haircut, the outfits, the glasses, even the riding those white horses on Mount Pektu, as he likes to do, is all designed to remind people that I am the special heir to the special family, and therefore I am the right person to be the leader of this country, you know, despite the fact he was, in his 20s, no experience when he took over.
Anna, there is a tendency, especially in the West, to look at the wackier aspects of the regime and easy to lampoon. Is that also a mistake, and not seeing how shrewd, how cunning and how successful in their own way, if the game is survival, successful in their own way, the regime has been?
Absolutely. If you treat Kim Jong-un as a cartoon-like figure, as a Bond kind of villain, then we are underestimating him, because he has been extremely calculating and shrewd in the way he has approached the job of totalitarian dictator. I mean, the proof of that is that he is soon, at the end of this year, going to celebrate a decade in power, and this is something that nobody predicted. He's really defied the odds to remain the leader of North Korea all this time, and he's done so by being very calculating in how he manages the regime inside the country, allowing this corrupt bureaucratic class to get wealthy under him, being very ruthless, having people, even his own family members, killed if he thinks they could be rivals, but also developing this very credible nuclear weapons program to be able to get the attention of the outside world and to be able to show that North Korea is able to make these very serious advances in its weapons policy. So he's trying to say to everybody, take me seriously, and we should take him seriously, because he is a threat to the outside world, and he is a threat to the people of North Korea on a daily basis.
All of that raises this final question, Anna, and that is, how long can a regime like this survive? It has been written off in the past. There have been those who've predicted the collapse, and it is still here. How does he hold on to that hold on power?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a long time not to predict anything with North Korea, because they have defied the odds so many times. By rights, they probably should have collapsed with the Soviet Union, or during the 90s when there was this devastating famine, or at the death of Kim Jong-il in 2011. But they have managed to defy all of these predictions over the years and remain in power. So I certainly don't see any sign that Kim Jong-un is losing his grip or that he is going anywhere soon. But having said that, I think he's probably in the most precarious position of his tenure right now because of COVID, not because of sanctions, but because of COVID. They have closed their borders for more than a year and cut off their economic lifeline to China. So I think things are very difficult inside the country right now. And so I imagine that he is in the most precarious situation he's been in. But whether that proves kind of fatal to his reign, we're yet to see.
Indeed. Anna Fairfield, always good to talk to you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Stan.
So what's it like to report a country that is so closed? Jongbin Kim does exactly that as a journalist for NK News. She joins me now from Seoul. It's nice to have you with us. Can you just give us a sense of what's happening in North Korea right now? There have been reports of some unrest, some instability, concerns about famine, concerns about COVID. Just how stable or otherwise is the Kim regime?
I think it's more stable than most people believe. It seems Kim Jong-un is continuing his usual governance activities, and although there were some reports about potentially his problems about his health, but it seems he is healthy enough to hold hours-long meetings for multiple, sometimes days in a row. And when it comes to food crisis, Kim Jong-un himself did admit that the food situation is tense inside North Korea, but it seems that he's following up with these countermeasures to actually stabilize civilian economy. We don't know if whether or not those measures actually work. There were reports about military grain reserve ordered to be distributed to the civilians, and other measures as well, such as using munitions factories to create commodities for the civilians. But whether or not these measures actually work, it seems that Kim Jong-un is putting a lot of effort into showing the leader image that he is a benevolent leader who cares about the civilian lives. And it seems the level of propaganda is increasing in terms of how North Korean state media frames Kim Jong-un as a caring leader working so hard that he lost weight as well.
Yeah, look, I want to ask you about a country that has endured so many crises, war, of course, but then ongoing conflict, 30,000 American troops on the border, a country that has faced famine, a country that is isolated, has had sanctions imposed against it, and yet the regime has proven to be shrewd and so resilient, and now potentially, at least militarily, in a stronger position. What do you put that down to?
I think North Korea already has an answer to it. I think they believe that because they developed nuclear weapons, it became their very important leverage, and hence not like other countries cannot, attack them too easily. And they have seen other cases where other countries denuclearized. Some of the countries that the U.S. called rogue states, and also they are also seen the fall of communism. And so throughout history, they have learned how to survive these contingencies. And part of that is maintaining their hereditary dictatorship system and keeping the country isolated and keeping the outside world information blocked from the people, so that they have a convenient way to implement and create policies that serve the top elites in North Korea, and I think it's working.
Now, of course, you work for North Korea News, and that raises an interesting dilemma, and that is that how do you report a country that is so difficult to get access to get information from, where information can be weaponized, where people clearly don't feel that they can speak out. So trying to report a country like North Korea, how do you go about this? How sure are you of your information, access to sources? How do you approach this?
There are, I think, 3 layers of how we get information about North Korea for the journalists in this feed. First would be state media. Of course, state media, they should be read with a grain of salt, because that's what the propaganda and agitation department or the party says. But although you shouldn't trust everything they say word by word, you still get to see what kind of policy focuses that North Korean regime has, or what kind of things they are trying to hide, based on if you do daily basis baselining and monitoring. Second would be monitoring what happens in the inter-Korean space or DPRK-US space. There are intelligence, government-run intelligence in these countries, including Japan as well sometimes, and keeping track of these things, plus parsing them with what's coming out of North Korean state media sometimes helps. Third would be in-country sources, and this is the tricky part. As you probably know, there are many outlets that use unnamed sources, anonymous sources from inside North Korea, and there are many different levels of the in-country sources. There are sometimes foreigners in North Korea, and sometimes these are people who are at the border, Chinese-North Korea border, or these are sometimes civilians. But what I would say when it comes to using in-country source, when it comes to North Korea, is that you have to be very, very careful not to put their lives at stake as well while getting information. And also, it's very hard to verify. So even when you hear something from the in-country sources, you always have to try to double check with those 2 other areas that I've mentioned, or other in-country sources when possible.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Jongun Kim. Thank you again for giving us your time. And that's the program. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Stan Grant. Bye for now.